Hey guys, Seb here. In today's video, I will create a Spring Boot application in Java in order to do the basics for my new GitHub projects and for my YouTube channel. We will create a Spring Boot application with CRUD operation. In this project, we will see some REST operations, sub operation. We will do in-memory database with H2. There will be some Mapstruct also to map some DTOs to my object models. There will be some Lombok. We will also create some custom annotation for logging the execution time of our method. Yeah, mainly we will try to do that and try to put a lot of best practice in this project. I mean, they are mine. Maybe you have yours, but I will try to share my knowledge with you, and maybe you can be against also. There is no problem. We can start technical debates. The order is just to share my own experience with you guys. This first video, we will create the Spring Boot application like I was saying before. And in future video, we will always start from this project. We'll try to enhance it. We'll try to refactor it later. We'll try to optimize the code. So don't be so picky with the way I'm doing the thing. The main goal is to make this project evolve, just to try new stuff, you know. I like to discover new things. Even if the project is not coherent in terms of final business, we don't care. It's not the matter here. What I would like to do is just have some fun. I mean, we are here for that now. So, in this today video, yeah, we will do some CRUD operation and try to expose a sub web service and a REST web service also. And that's it. In later video, we will see, we will try to put some Redis, some Kafka, we'll try to create an image of our project with Docker. Let's try to have some fun. I hope you will enjoy the video. Have some fun. So, to begin with this project, we will start to create a new project in IntelliJ. I've already updated the POM. So you define the group ID, you define the artifact ID, define the version. It's a Spring Boot application, so you need to declare the parent. Here there are some properties, the version of the dependencies that I want to use. Here you see that we will do a Spring Boot web application. We will expose some web services, we will do some SOAP, H2 in-memory database, we will use Lombok annotation, we will use Mapstruct, we will use GPA. This for the string utils and stuff like that. The produce and consume annotation. This is for the unit test. So yeah, and the in-memory database in runtime. So I haven't put the scope at test because for this application we will not configure real database, at least in this video. So we will use the H2 in-memory database for the whole application. Okay, the purpose of the video will to create a CRUD operation on a user service. So we'll be able to create a user, delete a user, update a user, and of course, get the users. So what we need to do first will be, we will create the model. So I will create a package, so new package, .leg.demo. Let's call it like this, model. Okay. I will start to create other package, like service. Again, new package for the controller parts. And we'll create the repository package, repository package. Okay. What do we want? We want a user class. So we want a user class. It will be persistent in database. So we will create a long ID. We'll set first name,
we'll do the same with our last name, and why not? We'll create a local date for the birth date. I will not generate the getter setter. I will use Lombok to do so with the data annotation. Okay. I would like also to generate the toString. Oops. So, because it's an entity we want to persist, we will annotate it with entity annotation table. So the ID we need to annotate with that annotation. I'm a big fan of using dedicated sequence. So we'll generate the sequence, we'll give it a name, user sequence. You need to prepare also the sequence generator. You give a name, you give the same name, user sec. And we will set up the allocation size like that it will be updated each time per one. For the rest, I think it's okay. We don't need to use the add column, it will be persisted anyway. So now we have a user. It's nice, but we want to expose the user via a REST service. We will need a repository in order to retrieve the user or do some operation like save, persist the user, delete the user, etc. So we will create a user repository, which that will be an interface, user repository. Yeah, I have always to, I need to put that version like that for my Java doc. So, to have a user repository working in Springboot, it's simple. You need to extend one of the Springboot repositories. So here we will extend the GPA repository. We'll give the class that we want to have the repository work for. Here, our user class. And then we need to give the type of the key. So it will be an ID. I will copy that. That's it for the user repository. Now let's create the service that will contain the business functionality. Salam. So because it's a service and we can inject it in several layers, we will annotate it either via component. We can do components in Spring, but because it's a service, we will put service name. We will use the constructor injection. So we'll put that annotation with on constructor. We'll add the auto-wired annotation. It's like this. Sorry, auto-wired. I think it should be okay. You can, for the logger, you can add a select4j coming from Lombok. In the user service, we would like to perform some operations about retrieving the user, retrieving users, one users, delete users, etc. So to perform that, we will use the user repository that we have created just before. So we'll inject it. Normally, you can do auto-wired here and then private repositories or user repository, and should be okay. But because I'm using the constructor injection, with that, you don't need to put the auto-wired here, and you ensure that it's final and non-null. Okay, now we will do our first method in order to, I don't know, retrieve all users. So let's do it like this. We want to retrieve a list of user, retrieve users. That's it. Let's import. Oops, sorry. Let's import the class. And here, what we want to do, it's user repository that find all, because it's existing inside the GPA repository. Okay. And now I told you before we want to do a REST controller, so I will create a sub package here for REST, and I will create another one for SOAP later. So first we'll create the REST controller. User REST controller. Good. In the REST controller, we will expose again all the operation we want to perform. Oops. Auto way on. It's a REST controller. So because it's a REST controller, you need to tell Springboot it's a REST controller. So you annotate it with that annotation. We need to give a path also for the all REST operations. So let's say we want to use this path. So each time you want to perform any operation on a user, it will be on localhost because I will running it locally on the port 8080 because I haven't specified another port /users. I will also tell that my REST controller is producing JSON payload and is also consuming JSON payload. That's it. We will also manually inject our user service. So user service. And for example, what we want to do, we want to retrieve all the users that we have inside the database. Retrieve users. That's it. There's nobody. We want to expose that operation as a get. So get mapping operation. And then what we need to do is return the user service, retrieve users, and let's test it. In order to test it, I will use Postman. In order to run the application, you need to create a Spring Boot application. I have not done it via the Spring Boot initializer. That's why my mistake. So let's create the demo application class. Again, you specify the version. It's a Spring Boot application, and then you define the main method, static void main args. Oops. Spring application run. The name of your class, dot class, and you pass the args as parameters. Okay, now it should start. Okay, the application has started in 2 seconds. So this is a get to retrieve all the users. Ta-da, the list is empty, but we have 200. That's normal because our database doesn't contain any user. So we will create an operation that allows us, to persist a new user. So here we'll do a past mapping. That should return a user. Create user. Let's pass a user here. So because it will be a post request, we will submit a body. So you need to tell to Spring that that parameter is a request body. What we need also, response. I think it's response payload. Okay. So you go inside your user service and you will persist your new user. So you should return a user. You will create a user in that method. It takes a user as parameter. First thing first. You remove the ID because you want only your database to handle the ID with the sequence. And then you will return the new user thanks to the repository, user repository, save user. I think it should be okay. You don't need to put the transaction annotation, so let's restart the application. Okay, the application has started. We do a get, there is no user. We will create a user with an ID. You can pass whatever you want because if not, this ID will not be persisted in order to avoid some conflicts. I will let the database to generate a new ID. You give a first name, you give a last name, you give a birth date, and then you send it. So you see the response is 200. There is a new ID, there is a new user, so you can send it plenty times. Because of the allocation of size of 1, it's increments every time a new user, and then when you do a find, you will have plenty users. So now we have 2 operations, one to retrieve users, one to create a user. Before going further, I will start to refactor because it's a good approach. It's a simple approach. Okay, we wanted to expose a simple REST service. It's easy. You just declare your model, you declare your repository. It's an interface extending this. It's really easy. It's done magically for you. And this also, you just use the repository and that's it. But we want to do some more complex stuff. Because, for example, if you're working on a company, you will integrate your application with some other existing applications. And maybe those application data model will be different than yours. So you will need to create what we call DTO. DTO is data transfer objects. So it will be the data that will transit from one application A, let's say, to an application B. And maybe you will need some mapper in order to map the incoming DTO into your entity model. So we'll create something that looks like very close to a user. So very close to that entity, but a little bit different. Like that, we'll see how we can do a mapper. So what we will do inside our controller, I will create a new package for the DTO. DTO. I will create a user DTO. Okay. The user DTO will have also an ID. It will have also a first name, a last name. It will have a birth date also, but we'll do it with a string and not a local date. And let's say it will have an age. It will be an int age. Okay. So let's compare our two classes. This one has an ID. first name, last name. The date will be different, okay, and the age, which is a new attribute. In our REST model, what we will do first, instead of retrieving a list of user, we will retrieve a list of user DTO data. And here, instead of retrieving also a user, we will retrieve a user DTO, and we'll pass as a parameter a user DTO. Easy. Now our method, the signature is not good. Okay. So I will change it. I will also use an API. Okay, because I'm starting to do some complex, not complex, but I'm trying to optimize the code to do some refactoring. So you see here there is a limitation. I will create an API, and because I want also to use sub-service that we will implement it later, you will see that the usage of an API is very important. But we will do it just after. Okay, so we want to retrieve a list of users and we want to create a user from a DTO. And the DTO is a bit different than the data model that we have. So I will create what we call a mapper in order to map a user DTO into a user and the opposite. So let me declare a new package mapper. Let me create. I like the interface, so I will do a user mapper interface. Again, my version. So I'm using Mapstruct. So if you don't know Mapstruct, you declare an annotation at mapper. I don't know if it's mandatory, but putting this because it's an interface, I will create a singleton here in order to get an instance of my mapper. Like that, I don't need to instantiate from a constructor. So I will declare a map method. I want a map method that will return a user from a user DTO. What I want to do also is the opposite. Okay. So now we need to tell Mapstruct what to do with the mapping. Basically, Mapstruct will take all the fields from user and will map them into the name, thanks to the name to into user DTO, where the fields have the same name. So ID will be mapped into ID, first name into first name, last name into last name, birth date, etc., etc. Basic. Here, what I want to do is I will tell to Mapstruct to do a special mapping. Mapstruct to do a special mapping on the birth date from the birth date. So you specify the source to a target. You specify again the target, sorry, birth date. And here I will create a method that I will call it here, and I will say birth date. So I will do exactly the same here, but I will create a format date. So what will be the purpose of our parse date method and format date? Because in user DTO, we have a birth date, which is a string. I want to parse it in order to return a local date for my user. And here, it's the other way around. So you have a date in local date format that you want to format into a string. with a special format. We will define it later. And that's it. Okay, I can already see in the comments that you will say you can use the JSON deserializer and the JSON serializer in order to do that. But I just want to show quickly how we can use Mapstruct in order to do some special mapping with some operations. So I know there is several different ways to do it, but just for the sake of this project, to use Mapstruct, we will do that. So I need to create two methods here in this interface. One will be named parseDate, and the other will be named formatDate. Currently, there is no method that I will create a date utils in order to do the conversion. So I will just create a package utils, package util. I will create a new date util. Again, you specify your version. So SLF or J. Because it's a util class, you need to hide the constructor like that. No developer will be able to instantiate an instance of the date util because it's a util class, so you just use it with everything static. I will just declare a public static binary datetime formatter. Let's name it formatter, correct? And datetime formatter, and we will use the ISO date. And now we will create our format and path method. I have already implemented them, so I will just paste them here. So here we will format the date. So we receive the local date as a source. We ensure that it's not null. And then we format it, then we return it. We return the date as a string. And here we will do the same from a string. We will parse it. So we ensure that the string is not null. We'll try to parse it. You can raise a datetime parse exception, but for me, what I want is if the date is not in a good format, if I cannot parse it, if you, for example, you wrote Toto inside the string, so you cannot parse it, I'm just logging the exception. I will be fault tolerant. I will just return null, and I will let the service decide what to do with. So in my mapper, now what I can do is create my two named method. One will be parse date. Because it's an interface, I will create a default method. So I'm creating a parse date that receives a local date as string format. And I will just return my date utils parse and my local date. I will do the same, for the format date. Default, we want a string, we want to format the given date, it's a local date, return date utils dot format local date. What we can do is to create a new method that will compute the age of the user for us, because the main difference between the user and the user DTO is first the type of the birth date that was located before in the user, and string for the user DTO. And now we have a new field that represents the age of the user. So once our mapping is done, it will map all the fields, the existing field into the user DTO for this method, and all the fields from the user into the user DTO. But here you have an extra field more, which is the age. And the age can be computed by creating an after mapping method that will be run after the mapping, like the annotation side. So let's define its default void. Let's call it after mapping. We need to tell what will be the mapping target. So it's a user DTO. And you can declare what will be the sources, but you don't need to specify an annotation. So you just put your user, which is the data model. So on the user DTO, we want to say it's the age. Sorry. We'll use Lombok to be able to have the set indicators. So we'll set age, and we will compute the years between the birth date and now. So we can do period between the user dot get birth date and local date now. And you want to, because it's an integer, you want to get the years between that period. So now we have our mapper. So let's go back to our REST controller. So we say inside our REST controller that we have now, we want to retrieve a user DTO. So like I was telling before, I do like to use the API. So we will create a new interface user API 1.1.0 snapshot. So our API will have all the methods that we want to expose into our REST and subservice. So let's declare log. Because it's an interface, I will just declare it like this with logger factory, get logger, and the name of the API dot class. Okay, normally it's a private final static final logger, so you need to put logger in capital case, but here we are inside an interface, so it's public, and I named it log like the SLF4J. And you see, because it's an interface, normally the SLF4J annotation from Lombok doesn't work. So that's why I'm declaring the log like this. So create a default method that will return a user DTO, create a user that takes a user service as a parameter, user service, and a user DTO as a parameter. So we'll check that the incoming DTO is not null. Otherwise, we will raise an exception. So the DTO you want to persist must be not null. Captain Obvious. So because it's not null, we can log it. I tried to think like that, it will be nice. What we want to do, we want to create a user from the DTO. So let's create a method that will map the user DTO into a user. So, and because we have created a mapper just before, you know that we will invoke the mapper and inside a new method here. So let's declare it directly to model user DTO, return user mapper that instance, like that you get the instance map user DTO. That's it. Import everything. Let's create the same with the DTO already. DTO. Now we have a user, it's persisted, and we want to return back a user DTO. So what I will do is return to DTO the user that we just created before. That's it. And inside the user REST controller, we will, sorry, it's the interface, so we'll implement that user API. What we can do here is normally you don't need, you could put the get mapping into, you can put a get mapping here, for example, but that is something we don't want. Why? Because our API is agnostic of the concrete implementation of our controllers. So like I said, we will do a REST controller and a subcontroller. So our API here, we just define the global behavior of creating a user. Okay, so you take a DTO, you transform it to a model, and here, sorry, I was I went too fast, so you need to persist it. So you invoke your user service, create method, you pass the user and parameter. So here, it returns the persisted user with an ID, and then you transform it, you map it into the DTO. So what I was saying just before is you can do that, the get mapping, but I don't want to do that because I want to also to expose in sub operation. So what I will do here is inside my REST controller, I will change a bit the type of response we are including here. So I will say that I want a response entity that will be a wrapper for our user DTO. Still the response body, and then inside the user service, you don't need to do that anymore. What you want to do is to return a response entity with OK, and with the body that will be create user, passing the user service and the DTO. And here is complaining also because you want to use a DTO list and I'm retrieving a list of users. So let's go again into our UserApi API interface and let's complete it in order to retrieve a list of users. So again, let's create a default method. So that will return a list of user DTO. Retrieve users. So it takes a user service in parameter. So you wonder why I'm passing the user service as a parameter and not injecting it. It's because we are inside an interface, and inside the interface you can then do injection. That's why. So here, what do we want to do? We want to use the user service. We want to retrieve the users. And for each users, I want to map them into a DTO. Then I will collect it as a list and return as a list. So that's it. Let's go back to our REST controller, and then we have still the previous code, which is not working anymore. What do you want to do is now, again, we will do the same thing here with a response entity. So response entity of a list, list of user DTO. So again, response entity. Okay. You call the method defined inside the user API, which is retrieve users, and then you pass the user service as a parameter, and that's it. So I did plenty stuff. Let's test it to check if it's still working. Okay, so the application has started. Let me do a get, and you see there is no more user because in-memory database. So here I'm able to create 6 users. I'm still able to retrieve them. And I think the code is better because we are using an interface that is doing our logic, okay, invoking the user service directly. And it's agnostic from it is a REST or SOAP endpoint. So since the beginning of the video, I'm just telling that we will do SOAP services, etc. So let's do it. Let's do it. Let's implement the SOAP. So I don't know if you know, but in SOAP, what I like to do is to do the contract first. So in order to do a contract first, you will need a WSDL file. And maybe XSD file. So let me create 2 directory. So I will import, I will create here a demo dash user XSD, and I will also put a WSDL file. What are their content? So the demo user XSD is the schema definition. So here I'm defining the target namespace of my XSD file. We will create a user DTO complex type, which contains different attributes. The first one is an ID, which is optional with the mean occurs. You will understand why. You have a last name, a first name, a birth date as a string, and the age. So mainly, this complex type is the image of that user DTO. Then a user DTO list, which is a complex type having a user DTO, name users DTO, sorry, pointing on the user DTO, so that complex type. Max occurs unbounded, min occurs 0. So it means it's a list that can contain 0 or more elements of type user DTO. I have also created a user DTO filters. So later, I think it will not be part of that video because it will be too long, but we'll create some different filters like that. We can do retrieve users by name, by ID, by first name, last name, birth date, and then you even more you can combine by first name and last name, etc., etc. So in fact, this is a copy of that guy, but with all the field optionals. Like that, we can use filters or not. In order to, because I'm using WSDL first approach, I will use a plugin to generate from the XSD and the WSDL file the POJO. You need to split in that way the element and the complex type. Like that, the plugin will generate for you the object factory with the create method inside the constructor, you will have the attributes. If not, you will have no args constructor, and that we don't want. So, aside this file, we have also a WSDL file, which is our web service contract file for SOAP operation. You define your namespaces. You import XSD. Oh shit, IntelliJ screwed up rearranged the code. Okay, so it moved everything by alphabetical order. So it put the binding at the beginning. Okay, I have to configure better my IntelliJ for next video. So here we are telling to our WSDL to use the XSD file, which is located in /xsd/demo user. So we are here the dot of XSD demo user XSD. Okay, great. We define also our messages. We'll do create user request of type that contains the user DTO. We will create a user response. Will contain also a user DTO. Retrieve user request that can use a user DTO filters, and retrieve user DTO which will contain a user DTO list, so a list of users. Then you declare the operations, the binding. You declare your port type, and you declare your web service, demo service. Okay, so that's it for the configuration. Also, because I was saying I was using a plugin, so for this video I'm using Maven JXB2 plugin. So you say that we will generate the sources into that directory, which is the target generate sources. You create your package name. You indicate where is your WSDL file, so the WSDL directory. It must include the demo-user WSDL. You can also put star.WSDL like that, it will generate for all your WSDL file. But for the sake of the demonstration, let's do it like this. The phase, the Maven phase, etc., etc. So let's generate the sources and see what's happened. So the build is a success. We can check our target, generate sources. It contains a com folder, elig, demo, XSD, object factory with the target namespace. And you see here, you have now create user DTO, which takes a DTO and return the JXB element, so it will be easier for us to implement it. Let's make IntelliJ aware of those new classes, and let's start to refactor our code. Let's delete this guy. Oh, and IntelliJ starts complaining. We will replace the user DTO by the one generated here. It's signaling me a problem because also inside the REST controller we add by the past that import, so we replace it. We're still complaining because for the mapper also, the mapper we were mapping our user to our previous user DTO. So now I have changed it, so I will import it. So normally we are good here. So let me generate the sources again. Let me try to run the application and check if the REST controller is still working despite the changes. Let's open Postman. Okay, still 200. Let's create a user. We can still create users. We can still retrieve the users. So What I did is just I have imported the WSDL and the XSD with the same structure, okay? Only the package has changed. So that's why my refactoring was easy. And my REST controller is still working. Okay, now, because I'm talking about SOAP since the beginning of the project, I will create a SOAP controller. Let's copy paste the version. User SOAP controller. Okay, implements user API. So you see here why it's important to have an API, an interface. Like that, you can have two different controllers using the same interface. So here I call it API because I think it's better. And you will have exactly the same behavior, whatever the layer you want to use, if it's REST, if it's SOAP. I think it's a good way of doing things. In order to have our SOAP controller working, we will need also to configure it because we are doing Springboot SOAP controller. So what I will create is a web service configuration class, web service config. We will enable the web service. And because it's a Java configuration class, we will annotate with configuration. We will declare our namespace. Because it's for SOAP, you need the namespace. http com.generique.demo / WSDL / demo-user.wsdl. Okay. Now we need to declare bin that will return a servlet registration. Let's call it message dispatcher servlet. It needs an application context. Let's declare the servlet. On the servlet, what we will do, we will set an application context. That's on this guy. And then you return a new servlet registration bin with the servlet as parameter, and you will give it a path. So we will expose all our SOAP calls onto the SOAP root context. I will do the same for the rest later. Let's create a second bin, name it demo with the 11 definition, default WSDL 11 definition. So let's create the definition. Because I'm using contract first approach, I will just create a simple definition using a WSDL file. So you just need to set up the WSDL. So you pass as a parameter a class path resource, which is the location of your WSDL file. And the name is demo user.wsdl. And you return the definition. Okay, now we have our configuration. We need also tends to wsconfig adapter. And now Spring will be aware about our SOAP configuration. It will be loaded at the startup, so don't worry, it's transparent. Just need to copy paste that configuration and it will work. Let's go back to the user sub controller now. We want some logging feature. Again, we want to do constructor injection on constructor, add a 2 times underscore, auto wired. That's it. And it's an endpoint sub, so you need to declare it as endpoint. Like in the REST controller, so I will display side by side both. You want also to inject your user service. That's it. You want also use the object factory that has been created thanks to the plugin. That's a shame that you cannot inject directly the object factory. So what we will do is to just create a post construct method that will set up our object factory for us, like that it will be instantiated only once at the beginning of the project. And voila. Here we have two operations. One it's a get, one it's a post. So inside the WSDL file, I have two operations, retrieve a list of users and create a user. What we'll do, it's the same thing, but for the SOAP. We want to specify what will be the payload route with the namespace, space that I haven't declared here. Let's import it statically here. Also, it's to declare the local part, create user. We want the response payload annotation also, and now you need to. So we want to return a JXB element of user DTO. User DTO create user method. It takes as a body a request payload as user DTO. Okay. What we want to return is the object factory, create user DTO with the user DTO passed in parameter. You want to use it, sorry. And the good thing of the user API is that we can use and have the same behavior. So you want to use that method. So you do create user, you pass the service that you have injected at the beginning and your user DTO. And that's it. We'll do the same thing for the retrieve users. But this guy will take a user DTO filters. And here you want, because it's a list, user DTO list. And for now, because there is no filter, you don't pass any argument, only the user service. And why is complaining? Because it's a list. Yeah, you retrieve a list, and here you have a user DTO list which contains a list. Okay, so what you need to do first is to declare your user DTO list, new user DTO list, on the user DTO list, you want to get your list and you want to add all the retrieve users, user service. And here you put create user DTO list, sorry. Now I have a SOAP controller and a REST controller. So what we should do is to test it. Okay. So let's generate the source again. Let's start the application. Okay, the application has started. I have a SOAP UI project here. Okay. I have a create user payload. Here ID 52, do John, birth date. Let's start it. We created John Doe. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then retrieve users. So I have to request one with filter, one without filter. You can retrieve the 7 John Doe. And if you do with filter also, you can put whatever you want here because it's not implemented yet. We retrieve all the users. So you see in SOAP, it's working. I can close my SOAP UI, but it's working in SOAP. Is it still working for the REST part? Yes. And I can still post a new user. We have our 7 John Does, and we have 1 Sebastian Eli. Now we have 2 SOAP operations. We have, where is my REST controller? Here. We have 2 REST operations. So I think we are good here. Okay. What we can do more? I will do some, because I said it will be CRUD operation, so I will do the update and the delete also. I will only do it in the REST part for this video. I will do it also in a SOAP, but it will be only on the GitHub, I think. And what we can do also is to create an annotation. I promised it inside the video. We want to log the execution time of our method. I don't know if you know in Springboot, but in Springboot, it's easy to create an annotation and use it. You can create it with AOP, Aspect-Oriented Programmation. Declare all. Let's create a new package for all our annotation. Let's create an annotation which can be named log execution time because we want to log the execution time of our method. It's an annotation, so you need to declare it as an interface. You need to set up the retention to be at runtime, be used only on method. So method. That's it. Yes. Easy. You have created your first annotation in Java. Now comes the AOP. Package, AOP. So we will create a logging aspect. Okay. Because it's an aspect, you need to tell it to Springboot. It's also a component. We'll put some log here. And if you're afraid about the performance, we will add a new annotation, which is conditional on expression. So what does it do? it will parse your application property and check for the login aspect enabled property, which I will set as default value to true. So if you want to enable it or disable it, you just need to go to your application property. Let's create it, by the way, application properties. You can put false or you can put true. If you don't put it, by default, it's true. So let's put it at true and do some tests. So if you're afraid about performance issues, for example, for production, if you don't want to log your metrics, you can just disable it. Okay. So because it's aspect oriented, you can do before, after, and around. I think it's before, after. Yep, before, after, around. So before would be, like its name said, the method that we will declare will be executed before the method you really need to invoke. After will be executed after, and around will be executed around. So you can do your method intercepting the result of your method and do some stuff. So I think it's better for us to use the around annotation. You need to declare on what annotation, what will be the target annotation. So annotation limo annotation log execution time. Close the parenthesis. This I think it's okay. We want our method to return an object because it will be the result of the real method that is annotated by log execution time. Text and attribute, it's the proceeding endpoint. And we will rethrow the throwable exception. What we want to do, we want, before executing the method, we want to start a stopwatch. And after the execution of the method, you want to stop the stopwatch. And thanks to the stopwatch, which is incoming inside Springboot, we can use the pretty print in order to display in a beautiful way the result of the time execution of the method. So to do that, we will retrieve the method signature. Okay. We'll cast the proceeding endpoint signature as a method signature. We want to retrieve the class name. So from the method signature, get declaring type, get simple name. You want to retrieve the method name, method name. Thanks to the method signature, get the name. Okay. So here it's the fun part. You want to measure method execution time. You will do a stopwatch, new stopwatch. It needs an ID. So we're giving the class name with a beautiful arrow and the method name like that. It will be easy for an operator to do troubleshooting or get the result. And you start your stopwatch. What you need to do is, because it's around, we did some things before. Now you will execute your current method. So you ask to your proceeding endpoint to proceed is natural behavior, and then you stop your stopwatch. So just before the method you started, you execute your method, you stop it, and then you can log it. Stopwatch, pretty print. And then you return the result. Easy clap. So you can go to your controller now. Both controllers. Okay, we restart the application. You create a user. You get your list of users. And here you see inside your logs, encoding issue, I don't know. You see that your first post took that nanoseconds. It's in nanoseconds. I don't want to compute it, but it was very fast. Okay, so now we have an annotation. We have created, so we have our annotation, we have the AUP, we have API allowing us to create and retrieve users. We have a REST layer, we have a sub layer, we have a mapper, we have a simple model, we have a simple repository, we have our service, a util class. So I will just extend the REST controller with the rest of the CRUD operation. So let's do it quickly. And I think it's all for this first tutorial. CRUD, create, read, update, delete. So we have create, read. So we want to update and delete. So let's create a patch method. You can do put, but here for the demo, I will create quickly a patch. We'll also log the execution time. It's a patch. So in Springboot, we have the patch mapping. Because I want to do a RESTful application, I will respect the RESTful structure. So public response entity. We want to retrieve a user DTO that will be updated. We want an update response method, path variable, ID. You want a request body, user DTO filters. Why user DTO filters and not user DTO? The main difference between both, they have exactly the same attributes, but required. So it means if I want to update my user and my database, if I use the user DTO, I am forced to provide a last name, a first name, and a birth date. So I cannot update separately the last name, the first date, and the birth date. So I have created a user DTO filters. It will be for a following video where we can do some filters on the read operations from the CRUD. And for the read, I will be able to pass one of those arguments or maybe combine 2 or 3 or 4 or all arguments all together. So that's why I've named this user DTO filters. So what is good is I can provide a user DTO filters instance with no arguments or with 1 or 2 or 3. And it's most powerful than only user DTO. So that's why I'm passing here user DTO filters. What I want to do, I want to retrieve a user DTO from update. user method that we will create just after, passing a user service, the ID, and the user DTO filters. That method doesn't exist yet. It will be implemented inside the user API that will have the same behavior for REST and SOAP operation. And then when it's done, you want to return a response entity, okay, with your user DTO as a body. But maybe it can fail. So if it's failing, because the request, the incoming body is not good, we can return a bad request. So in case of error, try. For example, if something is null, we will log the error. You specify the ID, the error, and then you return the response entity, bad request. It's a builder, so you need to build it. Okay, we are good here. Now you need to create this method into the user API, create read update. So we want a user DTO as a response. We say update users, user service as a parameter, user service, the ID of the resource, long ID, and the user DTO filter, user DTO filters. That's it. I will just copy paste to be faster from my GitHub project. First thing first, we retrieve the user by ID. So retrieve user by ID, we need to create that method. In the retrieve user by ID, it's a proxy to user service retrieve user by ID. Okay, let's create it also. Okay, so let's go back to our update user method. Like I said, the goal of the patch is onto the user's root content, you will give an ID. You give an ID, and thanks to that ID, we are supposing that the user exists inside the database. So first thing first, you retrieve the user by ID, it's calling the user service, that it's calling the user repository, and find by ID, provided by Springboot. So you have an optional user as a result. What we need to do is, I can do the isEmpty or not, but I'm using require no null to fail fast. So it will throw a null pointer exception if no user found with that ID. And I log the ID. Again, if there is a user but no update parameters, it's nonsense to do an update. So I will throw also a null pointer exception. Now, once all our prerequisites are okay, I will just retrieve the user. The birth date, what we need to do is to pass it from the string into a birth date, which is local date. If it's not null, because if you remember well, I want it to be fault tolerant. So if there is an exception, I just logged it and I return null. That's it. So if it's null, I don't want my service to explode. I just do nothing on the birth date. That's all. If the birth date parameter is not okay, if it's TT, Toto, Tata, I will not update the birth date. So if it's not null, it means it's a valid local date. I can update my birth date. If the first name is not empty, I will update the first name. If the last name is not empty, you understand the logic, then, and you return the DTO of user. Okay. Let's implement directly also the delete like that it's done and we can test it directly everything. The important thing is here we need to put the transactional just in order to have the update persisted automatically by Hibernate. What I'm doing? Transactional. Yeah, to have the update persisted by Hibernate directly. Let's create quickly the delete. Also, log execution time. It's a delete mapping. The path is the same. You give the path to the resource. Thanks to the ID, which is the primary key. Public, you return a response entity of nothing. Delete user response. Let's name them also response because it's a response entity. Response. This guy takes a path variable as a parameter, which is the ID, and that's it. You don't need anything to delete a user. So you collect the response, delete user. That will be created inside the UserApi. You will pass again the user service because you cannot inject inside the interface. You pass the ID, and depending on the response, which will be a boolean to know if it has been correctly deleted or not. Response entity dot OK dot build, or if no user has been found, 404. OK, just the delete method is the last thing that we will do. We will declare it inside the user API. Oh, just let's put it here. Delete user. So default boolean delete user, it takes the service, the ID. You retrieve the user, which is an optional. If the user is present, you remove the user that we need to create inside the user service, and you return true. If it's not existing, it's impossible to delete a user that doesn't exist, you return false. And that's why inside here, you will put the not found. So inside user service, we need to create the remove method. So where is my user service? User service. Here, easy. Remove user, you take the user, you delete it from the repository. That's it. Let's test it. Okay. We start the application. I will reopen my SOAP UI like that. We can still check that everything is working. Okay. So first, we will create some users. I did some with Postman. I will do some with SOAP UI. Okay, there are some users. What we will do now, we will update John Doe on the ID 1. So the first user is Elix Sebastien, but now with that request, it will be name John Doe and the birthday is TT. Let's see what happens. John Doe and still the birth date is 21 of April. So let's do a get to check it has been persisted, so it's okay. And now I will do a patch with a correct birth date. Again, it's under ID 1. Now we see the birth date has been updated. And now I will delete my user with the ID number 1. 200. I will do now 404 because it doesn't exist anymore. And you see my first user has disappeared. So inside that project, we have seen a lot of things. How to do some CRUD operation and REST, also exposing them in SOAP, using a user API for both, like that you have the same behavior, whatever the layer you have. We did an introduction to Mapstruct. Don't worry, in the following tutorial, we will maybe do more. We created a custom annotation. We created a util class using Lombok. So I think it was a good start for our project. So in the following videos, I will also enhance that project. I will, for example, put Redis, Kafka, etc. And I will do some video with similar content, but in Quarkus. And instead of Java, I will use Kotlin.
Hey guys, the video is over. I think we achieved the goal. Create a Spring Boot application, up and running, exposing sub operations, REST operations, be able to create a user, delete user, find the users, update the user. Yeah, I think it's what I wanted to achieve. So they are persisted into H2 in-memory database. It will be something that we can make evolve in the future video. So if you like this video or not, leave a comment. If you like those kind of video, please subscribe to the channel. It will help me a lot to provide some new contents and new tutorials. Don't forget to tick the bell also if you want to be notified for each new video. And for those who want to know what will be the direction of the channel, it will be some Spring Boot application in Java. And I will do also Quarkus application, but in Kotlin, because I just want to discover Kotlin language. So I will try to mimic the Spring Boot project into a Quarkus project with Kotlin. Yeah, I think it can be fun. So tell me what you think about it, and see you in the next video. Bye.